The Syrian Civil War has entered a renewed and unexpected phase in late 2024. After years of relative stalemate, a major offensive by rebel forces has shifted the conflict's dynamics. Key strongholds like Aleppo and Hama have been recaptured, marking significant changes in the balance of power. The Battle of Aleppo in November 2024 was a turning point. For the first time in nearly a decade, rebel groups managed to retake central Aleppo, a city that had been under Assad's control since 2016. Coordinated attacks between Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, a dominant Islamist group, and Turkish-backed factions allowed the opposition to overwhelm regime forces. Just days later, rebels advanced southward to Hama. The city is not only strategically critical, it connects northern Syria to key regime strongholds, but it also carries symbolic weight. Hama has been a flashpoint for government crackdowns since the early days of the war, and its loss is a blow to Assad's forces. To understand the significance of these recent events, the roots of the Syrian Civil War must be revisited. It began in 2011 during the Arab Spring, when protests erupted across Syria, calling for reform and an end to corruption under President Bashar al-Assad's rule. The regime's violent response transformed protests into a civil war. By 2012, the country was divided, with the government, rebel groups, and extremist factions all vying for control. Key battles, like those in Homs and Aleppo, turned cities into ruins. The war reached a major turning point in 2016 when Assad's forces, heavily backed by Russia and Iran, retook Aleppo. This victory solidified Assad's control over most urban centers, pushing rebels into the northern provinces of Idlib and Aleppo's countryside. In 2024, a new phase of the war began. Rebel factions, regrouped and strengthened, launched a coordinated offensive in late November. The operation began in Aleppo, where regime forces were caught off guard. HTS fighters, alongside the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army, managed to breach government defenses, seizing control of significant parts of the city. Following their success in Aleppo, rebel forces moved quickly to Hama. This city's location is strategic, as it sits between rebel-held Idlib and regime-controlled central Syria. Its capture opens pathways for further rebel advances while cutting off key supply routes for the Assad government. Turkey's role in Syria has been a driving factor behind the rebels' renewed momentum. For years, Turkey has supported opposition forces, particularly the Syrian National Army, as part of its strategy to counter Kurdish groups near its border. In 2024, Turkey increased its involvement, providing weapons, logistical support, and tactical guidance to allied rebel factions. This support has allowed rebels to coordinate more effectively against regime positions. Turkey's interests are twofold: securing its border from Kurdish influence and creating conditions for the return of Syrian refugees currently living in Turkey. By assisting rebel groups, Turkey strengthens its influence over northern Syria while achieving its broader regional objectives. The renewed conflict raises critical questions about the future of Syria. Rebel successes in Aleppo and Hama have weakened Assad's position, but his regime is far from defeated. Assad still controls Damascus, much of the south, and areas along the Mediterranean coast. With Russia and Iran tied up in other conflicts, the regime's ability to respond effectively is diminished. If rebels maintain momentum, they may advance toward other key cities, challenging Assad's dominance in central Syria. However, internal divisions within the opposition, as well as the controversial role of extremist groups like HTS, could hinder long-term progress. The Assad regime is likely to lean heavily on Iranian militias and Russian air support to launch counteroffensives. If successful, the conflict could return to a bloody stalemate, with both sides locked in a cycle of territorial gains and losses. As fighting intensifies, the humanitarian crisis worsens. Thousands have already been displaced by the recent battles in Aleppo and Hama, joining millions of refugees who have been forced from their homes since the war began in 2011. Aid organizations warn of worsening conditions as winter approaches. The renewed violence underscores how deeply fractured Syria remains. The country's future will depend on the outcome of this new offensive and the roles played by regional powers like Turkey, Russia, and Iran. The Syrian Civil War, now entering its 14th year, continues to reshape the region. The events of late 2024 may mark the beginning of a new chapter, one defined by renewed conflict, shifting alliances, and further uncertainty for millions of Syrians.